Well, here we are, RSA 2026, San Francisco, California. As you can imagine, there's a lot of conversation about AI here and on the showroom floor and across the globe. Coming off of a recent announcement of Akamai Guardicore Segmentation being an AI-powered microsegmentation solution with exposure analysis and response, I am joined today by a very special guest and peer of mine,
Michael Villad. So nice to see you, Clint. Give you some background about myself. I've worked primarily my entire career in the financial services industry as a practitioner, building out strategy, kind of boots on ground situation. And now I can be here at Akamai and take what I've learned in the industry, all of the different attacks that we had to defend against, different patterns that we've seen, and I get to kind of provide that information and share that with a lot more folks.
Yeah, very good. I mean, as you can imagine, just AI is being adopted everywhere, not only from a tooling, but from an attack scenario. How do you feel the AI is being weaponized from phishing to lateral movement and exploitation and guidance there? How do you think this changes the defender's paradigm in cybersecurity today?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question. Ultimately, the velocity of attacks, they're increasing substantially. You can have agentic AI capable of checking for vulnerabilities and exploiting them. It's collapsing the kill chain. It's simplifying that model. It's reducing the amount of effort needed by attackers to pinpoint weaknesses and attack them, and basically breach an organization. So the dilemma is time to attack has been reduced substantially.
Yeah, so that actually leads into a good question I would have is, do you feel today that AI is a net positive or a net negative for the SOC?
Well, I think it's a net positive, right? So the SOC, traditionally, they're dealing with a large volume of alerts, signals, and they have to sift through them all. But the reality of it is that's a problem that's existed prior to AI. What's the difference between parsing a million potential threats in a log or 10 million? It's the same situation, same circumstance. So being able to leverage AI to pinpoint those key elements, the key factors for risk, and figure out what they need to focus on, that's going to matter more for them, regardless of the increased velocity of attacks.
Well, yeah, not only the increased velocity, I think it also comes down to the increased velocity of the attack surface and how fast it's expanding with AI code pilots and really being able to advance the development phase for organizations that adjust to AI and the pace of business and the modernization of data centers is really looking at. I mean, it kind of speaks into APIs are so prevalent in today's modern application ecosystems. How do you feel that kind of positions not only the expanding attack surface with velocity, is like, what do you think that sets up for the defenders mechanisms today of how they have to adapt to that?
Yeah, so most organizations don't have a comprehensive model to govern these things, and when I say govern, I'm talking about the actual applications that are being developed, and those applications are different. They're modernized. They're a collection of APIs, and it's APIs, how they're utilized, the endpoints they interact with, and the code that's being generated is going to leverage these APIs more and more. We don't know the identity behind these APIs. We don't know what they're connected to, what they will connect to, and we don't have a collection of inventory of our APIs, much less governance around how these APIs need to be securely deployed and how we identify them.
Yeah, and I mean, as the attack surface isn't just the perimeter anymore. You look at the opportunity for attack as is the perimeter really the perimeter, where now it's an API, right? How do you see customers adapting to that to just kind of look through from a lateral movement? What do you think the most important characteristics are today, and how attackers are going after organizations as kind of a point of entry, so to speak? You mentioned identity. How relevant do you think that is to something like a microsegmentation tool today?
Well, it's critical, right? Identity is one of the key components that you need to measure a transaction on. You need to understand the who, right? And you're not able to authorize a transaction unless you can identify that aspect of it. And attackers will be leveraging, and what we've seen is attackers are in fact leveraging exposed APIs to find an entry path in. And they're trying to remain undetected and move laterally to get to the crown jewels, that get to your data, so they can perform exfiltration, or they can extort. And there's, multiple extortion campaigns that we're seeing. It's not just about encrypting your data, it's about preventing you from being able to recover. And resiliency is a big part of it as well. So there's multiple components to it. It's the how do we protect our applications and our APIs on the ingress, which is our new perimeter, and which is everywhere. It's not constrained to internet or on-prem. This is an application is going to function the way it needs to function. Perimeter is not defined. And in Zero Trust, we've talked about that quite a bit. There's no really set perimeter, and we should treat everything as if it's internet connected. Well, it's not talk anymore. It's where we're at right now. And that's how applications are operating, and that's how we have to secure them. And the only way to secure them is by ensuring that we understand the identity, we control that. We understand the communication pattern, we control that. And we control it granularly.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think a lot of organizations are to a point in maturity to where they really assume breach now. Like, how do you see microsegmentation changing the way we approach incident response and really lean towards an effective plan of cyber resilience?
Right, so we want to reduce the burden that we have on the recovery aspect. We want to make sure that we can leverage recovery when it's necessary and we can do it effectively, but we have to plan for it because the likelihood of a breach is increased. And how do we do that effectively is we have to contain better, right? So when we see an attacker, we need to put them in an isolated environment. We need to lock them down so that they have to re-win every battle every step of the way. That time is extraordinarily valuable. That means that we have time to respond to this as a human, but more importantly, if they're doing things programmatically or AI driven, this is happening at machine speed. We need machine speed to respond to it. So we have to have trust in the capabilities of solutions that we're using that are correctly containing these types of threats and reducing our exposure so that we can rely on the recovery in a much more defined way.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it that reminds me of a lot of, any sort of compliance or regulatory stuff. Like, how do you feel like, this is forcing AI is forcing organizations to move from more of a checkbox methodology of security to, good enough versus, really aligning to PCI and HIPAA and other types of, regulatory compliance, or even cyber insurance, for example. A recent report we have, shows the cost of cyber insurance can be, decreased by microsegmentation, and then even auditors coming in and mandating it to not only look for, from a policy rule governance and HIPAA, it's to say just saying you have segmentation isn't good enough. You have to validate that you are segmented. You have to test it and go. How do you think that kind of applies in more of a compliance and governance type situation for today's customers?
Yeah, so compliance has been a huge part of my life. Unfortunately and fortunately. And the reality of it is that, a lot of times it is potentially just a check in the box exercise, but what we've seen is the metrics and the methods that are required by different compliance, like for example, HIPAA. You're going to have to perform segmentation with HIPAA. That's changed now. That's a requirement. And it should have been in place, even much longer ago than it is today. We're seeing that with PCI as well. And that's always a good framework to reference because it's very practical. It's very easy to identify the controls and how to effectively implement them. But all of these things are aligning with, we need effective segmentation controls to control the east-west movement. We need a way of proving that we've effectively controlled that traffic. It needs to be auditable. It needs to be something that is consistent across our environments. And ultimately, organizations that are regulatory driven are moving away from this is a check in the box thing to practical risk, what it actually matters. And just from a simple perspective, when you look at things like PCI, which is not a audit requirement, but it's a standard, and then sometimes it's a contractual obligation. PCI audit is a complex task where you need to separate out your cardholder data environment, and microsegmentation is extraordinarily effective at being able to pinpoint those assets, find out where they are, and place a container around them so that they're now part of they're either part or not part of the audit scope, which is reducing costs for organizations. And we're seeing a lot of large enterprises actually looking at microsegmentation as a way to reduce their audit scope as well. So beyond just the practical security elements, it's just how do we do audit better and more effectively? Because audit is becoming something that is, the regulatory driven environments are becoming something more that's more specific in the controls that they want to see applied.
Well, just so time consuming, and as you look through, excuse me, you see, regulations just continue to get tighter and tighter as the years go on. Like, what do you see as like call it the assurance gold standard for 2026 and beyond with AI and all these different regulations, just continuing to evolve? Like, what do you see as that gold standard?
Yeah, for me, it's continuous validation, being able to prove at a point in time that we were secure, right? And being able to reflect that back and make sure that it's dynamic and it's applied going forward. When we make a change to the network, we want to make sure that there's no drift. We're not receding in our network security or cybersecurity position. Our risk is not increasing because we're not maintaining it. So continuous validation of these controls is highly, highly important. Being able to demonstrate effective regulatory alignment, it's critical to reducing risk. So, if we think about how AI is developing applications, we're going to be able to spin up applications at a much faster rate, and we may or may not have effective controls to govern those things. And when we do that, our scope for our regulatory requirements is increasing as we add more to our state and to our environment, right? So how do we make sure that things are coming online secure, that we're doing it on a time series basis where we can validate it came online secure, our security was in place the entire time? That's what really matters. And being able to demonstrate that is challenging, but it's going to be critical for all regulatory and audit kind of measures.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think if you look through, historically, microsegmentation specifically has been very human heavy, right? Very, very complex, very time consuming, a lot of, collaboration across the estate with your developers and your network teams and others kind of looking through that. How do you think AI is really shifting, how customers not only discover their applications, but roll out and really become adaptive in this sense where applications are changing daily or by the minute, sometimes with the pace across numerous industries? How do you see, the modern era of AI-powered segmentation fitting into that?
Yeah, so with the right data, AI can do a lot of really incredible things. Structured, clean data, very enriched, it makes sense. And so we're leveraging that to be able to identify applications. We understand when an application is brought up online, we know what it is. And it's not just about, taking data from our systems of record and applying those labels and to provide context to it. It's also being able to look at how it actually communicates and functions, cross-reference those things and make sure, hey, is our intent applied correctly? Do we believe that this workload, this device, or this identity is acting the way we expected it to? And does that match with our environment's record system to make sure that this is all in alignment, right? So are we seeing any kind of deltas or deviations from that? And that's a big part of what we're leveraging AI for, is being able to map out and understand these things, but in a completely programmatically driven way, which when you're doing microsegmentation or any security initiative, a lot of the friction comes from just being able to plug in organizational data into the platform, make sense out of the security that you're trying to apply, make sense out of the rules, and what is this rule actually for? We've seen these with firewalls traditionally for decades, trying to do a firewall cleanup effort in 1 year that goes into year 2, year 3, year 4, just trying to clean up things and understand it. This is something that AI is very good at. It's very, very good at being able to tell us the story behind these workloads, cross-reference data points, and be able to give us the kind of exact identity of a transaction or a workload or an API. And so that means that our controls can be more effective. They're more purpose-driven, easier to apply. We have more confidence when we apply them. We don't have to worry about making as many mistakes because there's so many data points that we're taking into account when we made this decision, and they're all referenceable.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think that's one of the major values with Akamai Guardicore segmentation, being a having a process level agent on the agent side of segmentation. We also do the agentless, but having that process level visibility gives so much data in order to allow the AI components of the engine to essentially go from, discovery to correlation to then making rule recommendations. And really it's about making everything faster, better, safer, and stronger, but leaning into that side of getting like evidence-based segmentation, right? To where you can go to a developer with evidence and say, this is what we're seeing in our network. This is how your application's, performing. This is how it's communicating with everything. Is this validated? And then now with, the recent announcement of the exposure analysis and response engine, now you're even tying that back to CVEs and ESPP scores, really looking through everything to understand, like, is it reachable? What is the real world risk and blast radius of this application to something that's vulnerable, reachable, and open to the internet and exposed, right?
Right.
So now that kind of, leads into even the discussion around shadow APIs being the new attack surface. Like, how do you secure something you don't even know is there?
Right. So, I mean, it starts with, just like it did with anything else, observability, right? We need to discover what we have in our environment. We need something that can provide us that telemetry that tells us what's deployed, and be able to cross-reference that with, is it legitimate, right? Just like any type of shadow IT or anything along those lines that we've been dealing with for quite a long time, it starts with being able to identify it. Is it known or unknown? That in itself, from a segmentation or security perspective, is a metric you want to measure, right? Is it unknown? Okay, what do we want to do with the unknown? Because generally the answer would typically be, I don't want it to be able to communicate on the network, but things are much more nuanced than that. And that's where the intelligence with AI really matters, is being able to make sense out of that. And going back to your point with microsegmentation, there's an exposure. Ultimately, it's a matter of being able to protect your assets and reduce your risk, and the residual risk that you always have. That's the exposure element. You want to be able to reduce the amount of attacks that are making it through as much as possible. But when they do happen, you want to be able to mitigate them. And the same thing is true with shadow APIs. It's just another place of another starting point. It's another place to begin with that journey of, do we understand what it is? How we place the controls around it? And there's a lot of tools that have been built, a lot of engineering teams that I've worked with, where we've done this stuff manually over years. We've built automation scripts to try and get us there, but there hasn't been a unified approach for it. And ultimately, being able to automate some of the tasks that I've had to do for these organizations, that's kind of where I see how this AI has been implemented. The things that I've had to do to develop out these programs, to implement them effectively, to make sure that they're operational, make sure they're sustainable. That's how we're leveraging this, not only for the API space, but for the network security space as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think even if you look at AI-driven attacks moving at machine speed, kind of thinking about it from an architectural standpoint and how everything is across multi-cloud, so many different environments, and host-based systems. Like, do you feel that a segmented network can actually self-heal and adapt real time in this modern world?
I think so. I think that the appetite may not be entirely there until we've seen that this works, and it's something that's anti-fragile. But we're learning from our results and we're improving on them. And I think that's like the North Star for everybody. But I think that it's absolutely a necessity, right? We have to get to that point. There's no question about it. In order for us to really derive the value of AI, we need to be able to properly secure against AI, both internally and both for AI-driven attacks against us. I think that it's critical for us to maintain human in the loop for as much as possible and be able to make that distinction or where we see fit. But we need to plan for eventually migrating these types of controls over to more programmatic driven things. And if we do that effectively, then we can place more of the emphasis on recovery, right? Things are going to go wrong, but they go wrong today anyway. And let's spend more of the time focused on resiliency as well. So let's lock things down, make sure that they're secure. And if it's overly permissive, that's unacceptable. If it's too aggressive, then let's recover from that quickly and respond to it. And I think that that's where we can realize more of the value without increasing our exposure to risk.
Yeah, that brings up a really good point as you kind of think about the tension between the pace of business and the pace of development and the regulatory bodies, like HIPAA. If you look through that, like how do you think that can help build, reconcile that tension between the two, in a modern development world where everything is moving so quickly? How do you think, from zero trust and microsegmentation, how do you feel it can help with that?
Yeah, so, this is one of my favorite topics, honestly, because whenever I had to do any of these security programs, the friction with the business and with developers has always been something that can even pose as a complete blocker for a program. It's something that could delay the implementation. It creates challenges that, are kind of unique situations that you have to plan for. But what I found is that when I share this information that I have in my cyber tools and what I look at, when I share that with the business and with developers, I can make their lives much, much easier, right? They're able to understand how their infrastructure works. They can optimize their infrastructure better. And ultimately, it came down from observability. And it's something that I think needs to be shared. I think that organizationally speaking, enterprises and any business for that matter, should be able to look at an application, how it functions, be able to understand it, be able to share this information with the business and be able to plan together and work together. And that opens the door for being able to shift left on some of these things where the application owner can be innovative, they can take chances, they do it within certain guardrails, right, that we define, but we don't contain them to the most granular restrictions. We let them self-service, we let them accept some of the modifications they want to make to their platform, but do it in a much more real-time way, right? When you think about the changes that we're making from a security perspective at such a granular level, sure, it could be impactful if it's a little bit too aggressive, but it's only impacting a very small subset of infrastructure. So the risk is actually quite low in most circumstances. So why not bring the developers into the loop? Why not bring the application owners into the loop? Let them be part of this decision-making process and let them develop and innovate and do it in a secure fashion and work hand in hand with them. That's the most effective model. And when I've done these types of things, when I've built these types of programs, having the heads of these lines of businesses reach out to me every quarter asking, hey, are we next? That was a highlight for me in my career. It made such a huge difference to know that I had the buy-in and support from the business because we're working together to solve a problem that really affected us both.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's kind of funny how I personally landed on the zero trust side of, in my career is, my background was more in app, API, and workload security of so many years, and kind of bringing this together as this converged model, as you see, APIs, and you got microsegmentation, and really pulling that kind of together in a synchronized defense system as you see the attack surface rapidly expanding, assuming breach. How do I isolate it faster? But you kind of come back to, I see microsegmentation as that bridge between network security and application security. As you said, you can really look to accelerate development when you give them guardrails. You're not slowing the pace of business, you're actually accelerating them in a very safe manner. And it kind of brings me to the next conversation because of APIs and the risk there is like, what are your thoughts on identity specifically and how that plays in with microsegmentation?
Right. So, I mean, for the context of identity, there's the identity-based microsegmentation, being able to define identity as a communication factor, right? So being able to include the who as part of the transaction is really, really useful. I mean, we look at it from like a traditional microsegmentation perspective. Who's allowed to, SSH or RDP into my crown jewel applications? Well, I want to be able to specify an identity beyond just, defining that it's got to come from a specific jump host or a specific, group of infrastructure. So from a traditional perspective, identity makes a lot of sense. But when you think about APIs, APIs are an identity. If you really consider how that's abused, right? If somebody's able to get a hold of your APIs and understand your APIs, they understand how your business functions. If they have your identity, they are your business and they can choose how your business is going to communicate. That's how they get breached, right? So when we talk about API security and microsegmentation, to me, they're two sides of the same coin. And my perspective is we need to treat communication patterns with APIs. We need to treat it as an identity-driven protection mechanism at the top. We want to make sure that this is authorized. We want to know the who and the what. And when it comes to the network side, we want that reflected there too. So we're controlling it from what is it trying to access and how is it trying to access this infrastructure. So we want to control it on both sides. We want to make sure that even in the event that there is a compromised identity, the controls are reflected on the network as well. And that's kind of like having a lock with two separate keys. And in order to make this transaction successful and have the data accessed in an appropriate manner, both aspects need to be approved and the controls need to be validated as part of that. Ultimately, we see this as running a kind of a synchronized automated defense system where we are taking the who and the what and also taking the where and the how, and we're processing those transactions real time with high fidelity and validating all of those criteria before we allow it to succeed.
Yeah, no, I think, as you look at a traditional firewall, right, obviously they're still staple in security at all layers, right? It's not saying that nobody needs them anymore. But like just thinking about that as a sense is that's merely the gate, right? And once you're through, once you're inside, like how do you have access to what? Who are you? What are you accessing from? And how are you tying, all of that information together? I think so much data can be pulled from an API. What is it processing? What's traversing the network, via that API? Like how do you see that playing into microsegmentation and kind of that next layer of defense as you look to kind of marry up API security, and microsegmentation?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's got to work hand in hand. With the traditional segmentation schemas, it's IP driven. It sits on the edge. You build your network around where you're going to place your enforcement points, and we really can't do it that way anymore. We need to know and discover all of our APIs. We need to govern them, and we have to make sure that our exposure there is reduced as much as possible. And if you think about it, when we do that, what's left is the APIs that have been governed, that are communicating, and that actually means that there's much less noise when we're actually trying to discover something that's malicious inside of our API space, because we've already put measures in here to make sure they're clean. So when you have clean API governance and implementation in your organization, you know how API should function, and when they exceed that guardrail or they exceed what's expected, that's an easy way for microsegmentation to now, I'm going to contain that. I'm going to prevent this from, moving laterally. I understand this is outside of what is normal, and that behavior is something that we can incorporate now, and something that we can respond to when we're working, with these two solutions in tandem.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So as we kind of look to wrap up here, like any final thoughts on microsegmentation and its position in zero trust? I know here at RSA, there's so much buzz about AI, and I think as Akamai, we've done a fantastic job of really controlling the way we talk about AI, but making sure that it's enforced in real world delivering to customer value. That's been proven through a number of different things and use cases with customers for early adoption. But kind of looking through that, like any final thoughts on how microsegmentation aligns with zero trust and can kind of overcome the noise that has been created by AI and agentic today?
Yeah, I think that with microsegmentation, it's foundational to zero trust. When you look at the network pillar, I honestly believe that having controls placed as granular as possible is critical. And just with the nature of how microsegmentation operates, the intent there is to keep it contextual, which means to keep it dynamic. And keeping it dynamic eases the burden to operationalize zero trust. And so the design of microsegmentation is accounting for not only the challenges to implement zero trust, but also where you want to place the controls, as close to the host, close to the workload, as close to the identity as possible. And it's foundational to be able to discover all of this information as well, and be able to use that information to help address other challenges and other areas in the zero trust journey that you want to build a framework around as well. Discovery is key to be able to protect things. You don't see it, can't protect it. And that's what microsegmentation does. We see the actual telemetry, we see the visibility, we see it down to a very granular process level way. And then overlaying the other platforms that we have, and being able to look at things like the APIs and how those interact in the network. You're taking your intent of how you believe your organization functions with the actual data of how it truly functions. And then when you find the gaps there, you know what to secure. And you can do it in a real-time programmatic way. It's event-driven and it's transaction-based, right? And that's why microsegmentation is really necessary in order to kind of move through that journey. And certainly on the network security side and cybersecurity side.
Yeah, you bringing up that point, I think I got one more question for you. Kind of put you on the spot here is, given the recent announcement of AI-powered segmentation and the exposure analysis and response, like I know throughout your career, mostly in financial services, you've dealt with a lot of different microsegmentation products. and kind of looking at those in principle and in all the use cases that you saw fit for the organizations you were with at the time. Is, in your perspective and from your view, like, what do you feel truly differentiates Akamai Guardicore segmentation from other competitors in this space today?
So there's two key elements that later on through my career is how I measured microsegmentation platforms, because I've gone through this journey. And the first thing is the telemetry, the visibility that I get. Do I have all of the visibility that I can possibly have to actually make decisions? And that's key. I want to have as much rich data as possible.
Especially with AI.
Particularly with AI.
Yep.
And in addition to that is flexibility within my organization. When you deploy microsegmentation or solutions that are similar to them, you will have to eventually do some automation, right? Or you want to incorporate into some custom tools, and that journey has always been, treacherous. It's complex. You don't always get the funding for this. You may not have budget to do this, and so fundamentally you have to work within the confines of the platform that you have. So whatever capability is available for one part of your ecosystem, even if there's not parity with another part, you're stuck with the lowest common denominator. If this is what I can do in Linux, this is what I can do in Windows, well, that means that I can do whatever's equivalent in Linux and Windows, and that's it. And so having flexibility in the solution that I can define controls that allow me to handle those unique circumstances, those last mile, that last 10% of the environment that I actually need to place controls around, that really mattered. And that's where, for me, Guardicore was critical, and that's where they placed so much emphasis on developing. And it made it so that I can turn these programs into something that didn't stall out into something that was successful. And a lot of the tooling and things that are being built now enables me to do those tasks that I had completely programmatically without having to worry about bringing in external budget or trying to, adopt some tooling that, is not allowed within my organization or is restricted. Like, we have a path now, and we didn't have it before because they were looking at what the customer really needs and building for that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think, some of the other things we've really been focused on over the last 12 to 18 months is, a lot of integrations, meeting customers where they are with the security tooling that they have to further advance the layer of visibility, to be able to make those informed decisions, apply that for faster policies, to make more accurate policies, but always remaining safety with that human in the loop, component of it. So, as always, it has been great spending time with you here. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit with me today. Thank you to the viewers at home. We look forward to advancing everything we're doing around microsegmentation and zero trust. And looking forward to AI.